Welcome to the Otherweb. Our guest today is Josh Brandau, the co-founder and CEO of Nota, a technology company focused on AI products for media. Formerly, Josh was the CMO and CRO of the Los Angeles Times and the San Diego Union-Tribune, and the CEO of Brandau Media.
Hey, Josh. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining. So you use AI to help journalists. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Wow, yeah. So to give you, origin story background, I was at the Los Angeles Times with one of my co-founders. I was brought in around the time that a local billionaire here in LA, Patrick Soon-Shiong, bought it from Tribune. He brought in a whole bunch of folks to try to really see what we could do from a technology perspective for the newsroom, for news organizations overall, because we were also overseeing the San Diego Union-Tribune. And we spent 4 or 5 years really building technology, borrowing technology. We didn't really steal anything, but that sounds better. Stealing technology in the space and kind of vowed, once we got it in a really good place, we could use this sort of the lessons we've learned and the technologies that we created and apply that to the entire legacy media industry. And that's what we did when we formulated Nota. So really what we've constructed is a suite of tools that provide journalists, audience team members, content marketers, everyone you can really think of that works with media, optimization tools and distribution tools that help them in their day-to-day to tell the story that they want to tell.
So I'm kind of curious about the specifics. I assume you don't want to write for the journalist, but what else can you help them with?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, we kind of have this, don't want to cross the Rubicon of generative AI for news specifically. So what we do is we try to help you with optimizations for whether that's search, SEO, pre-publish from an article perspective or a video perspective or a podcast perspective, and then really try to transmute anything that you've created from a story perspective into another distribution platform or medium. So taking those same things to start with, podcast, article, video, creating newsletters, creating social posts, creating videos or articles, whatever that it isn't out of that thing that you've created. All there that's completely editable. Nothing is published without a human. Nothing is really created without being extractive from the story that you've already told in the medium that you've told it in to start.
So does Nota's work start after the journalist has already finished the article, or do you also help with research or with some preliminary work, let's say?
We do no preliminary work at all. So you have to have created the story in whatever format you're the most comfortable in first, and then we take that, we optimize it for you in that format, and then we distribute it in different formats for you.
Do you think that is sustainable, or that over time AI will enter the newsroom at earlier stages as well? Because I can't help but think of farmers using a tractor, but you're saying that the only thing that they're allowed to use is the truck that takes the grain out, right?
Yeah, well, that's where we're at in this moment of time with news journalists specifically, right? So we wanted to make sure that we showed value to them with technology at this point. And we certainly have the ability to do all the things that you've mentioned. So help with research, provide them with a semantic understanding of other folks that have created articles, or if we're talking about articles that are similar on a topic as them, we can even wholeheartedly probably create a lot of those articles in the tone of voice that would be similar to these institutions. But we think it's super important at this stage to just show the value of what AI can do, as opposed to replacing journalists in this respect.
So last question on the product itself before we jump into the broader implications. Do you provide this to individuals like bloggers as well, or is this only for established large media organizations?
Great question. We're moving into more of a self-service model next year, but this is really for enterprise-grade media organizations and really Americanized English versions of media organizations specifically is where we're focused right now. So local market TV stations in the US, newspapers, radio stations, lifestyle publications, that kind of thing.
So now switching to the broader question, it seems like media is getting squeezed.
It seems like.
Seems like. I'll allow you the opportunity to disagree, but I doubt you will. My personal understanding is that essentially there's a lot more content getting created, but the number of eyeballs chasing that content is about the same. So it's harder and harder to monetize it. And there's a lot of discussion in the industry about ads or other media, but in reality, it's just there's a lot more supply and demand is about the same. And so how can the industry adjust? I understand that AI tools are a part of that, but at least it seems like the goal here is not quite to save cost, right? So what should the industry do, or how do you think that's going to develop over time?
Well, there are more eyeballs because, right, there's more people being born. Although we have a problem with that too, from a population density perspective. I knew you were going to probably talk about it. So maybe we are losing eyeballs as well. Yeah, I mean, we could attack this from so many different perspectives. I think the way in which we started this company was thinking about optimization from time-saving perspectives, and then also being conscious of the fact that the way in which people consume the stories of the world around them has shifted, and the expectations there are shifting, if not completely, pretty dramatically away from those traditional elements that people used to rely on. So the 5 o'clock news, or a newspaper every morning at your doorstep, or the radio as you drive to work, right? There's social platforms, obviously. I mean, you can get most of your information from Twitch if you follow the right streamers. It's just like there's a lot of options, right? So where we're at is we're left with these huge institutions that are really optimized for very specific, antiquated formats to tell these stories, right? Like the LA Times, 600 plus reporters in the newsroom, and they're optimized for an article that's 500 to 1,300 words. We know that, story depth, even for people who are really into reading about the news junkies that love reading the Los Angeles Times, for example, I think on average is like 50%, 40% of the stories read. The inverted pyramid is not a structure that people with attention spans are interested in anymore. So I think there's a lot of compelling ways in which this needs to change, right? We're in a period of transition. Technology has passed by all the institutions of media as they've been represented for the last 30 years in a pretty dramatic fashion there too. So what do we do next? Because I think stories haven't gone anywhere. People are still people. We're still humans. We still have this fundamental urge to connect with the world around us and people around us, and we want to know what's happening. That's never going to go away, I would argue. But the formats and structures by which you should expect to get that information is already gone away.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but the Otherweb is a news aggregator, and one of our most popular features is summarizing articles into 3 or 4 bullet points, because people want to essentially skim dozens of articles before they actually commit to reading an entire article somewhere, right? And so we see people skimming many, many, many different summaries and then clicking on the one article that really interests them to read the full 800-word thing. And I guess in some sense, if you translate the length of an average summary into the length of an average TikTok, it's about the same.
Agree. I mean, there's a reason Axios sold for $500 million, right? Brevity is key in this world. I would also argue that media transmutation is going to be key. So the expectation of getting whatever you want to know about the world around you in whatever format you want is already here, and the capabilities already here as well. It's just seeing the future of what that's going to look like is kind of fascinating. At one end of the extreme, you have, purists, just like people who still have mechanical keyboards today, right? At the other end of the spectrum, you have people who want their news delivered by cartoon dinosaurs singing K-pop of the top 5 stories of whatever you want. You can make it right now. It's pretty much endless. It's just the thing that remains is that stories need to be created. And oftentimes, if we're trying to rely on AI to help us create the narrative structure of a story, it's still not even close to there, I would argue.
Do you think that there's something we can do to free up more of a journalist's time to research, which is essentially the one thing that humans can do and AI cannot possibly compete with, finding facts that nobody else has?
Yeah, I mean, we can take away the need for them to do other jobs, right? So back to the early point that you made, I mean, the nature of all of these institutions is they're crumbling. They have had layoffs for many, many years. Journalists are expected to do literally every aspect of the business that they were not required to do in the past. So if you can free up that time, they can do what they're best at. And I would argue that a lot of them aren't even that good at actually writing. They're really good at connecting the dots, right? To your point. That's where humans still excel. And I think that if we give them more time to do that and reward them in other ways besides SEO optimization and making sure that it's on all the social channels, then we get way better information about the world around us and everyone wins.
So I'm kind of curious because you mentioned several times that you think generative AI is not quite there yet in terms of writing. And you're one of the few people I've met who essentially crossed over from the world of people who write really well into the world of people who build tech for a living. So what is your understanding? How fast is it progressing? How far away is it from writing better than most humans? Where are we?
It already writes better. I mean, first, I am not either one of those things. Like, I was never a journalist. I was supporting the journalists with business. And I definitely don't know how to make the tools that Nota's created. I just run the business side, right? So I can just see both of those very up close. How about that? I would say that it definitely has the ability to write better than most humans today. Most humans aren't very good. There's an adverb problem that I think is pretty obvious. I think that it has the capability to have a complex thought across 2 to 3 different sentences that I would structure as individual, but it tends to continue to put those into one long form thought process. That's the semicolon should be left with academics, I think. But other than that, it's really strong. It's just not that good at providing with counterintuitive insight yet, with really providing you with a bold point of view and a tone of voice that's specific to a person that you can tell comes from experience. I think it's getting there, though. I think, and that you've probably talked about this and thought about this a lot, but Notebook LM is extraordinary in terms of crossing that divide in my mind. It's the first real magical moment I've seen since chat was introduced a few years ago, because it's really taking, without human intervention, it's making so many decisions that are very nuanced under the surface. It's taking whatever corpus of data you provide it and deciding what the relevant points are, having counter intuitive kind of responses to stuff, asking questions. It's pretty amazing and it's scary.
So if we extrapolate that scary part a few years forward, should journalists be focused on basically preparing for a world in which only they know how to write well and have counterintuitive thoughts? Or should they essentially prepare themselves for a world in which the journalist is more of a PI who basically produces their output as shorthand, like bullet points? Here are the facts that I've uncovered, and somebody else can do the writing because that is a solved problem?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I would say that the PI aspect of that is the true value of journalism, it's in my mind. The investigative journalism has always been lauded as the most important aspect of the fourth estate, and I tend to agree that that'll be the last most important bastion of what human journalists need to be doing, is holding other humans accountable. But a lot of the things that can be reduced to stats or this happened here, who, what, when, where, why kind of thing, will go away because you don't need a human to really understand the nuances of that. You'll need a human to curate the information that exists for other humans. I think that is something that we excel at, because there are a lot of things that are tangentially related to interests that you only would intuitively kind of know through experience and not through an algorithm. But yeah, I think that's a really good point.
All right. What has your experience been like essentially selling technology to an older institution that probably thinks in an older way? Yeah. What have you learned along the way?
Wow. Well, you know the answer to some of this. I would say humans, I would say over any time horizon, it's funny to watch humanity. And this is a very truncated time horizon. So 2 years ago, so let's start here. Journalists love nothing more than to talk about the death of journalism, right? Like, it's their favorite topic. They like to write about it. They like to talk about it. They like to do everything they can with it. So when this technology emerged a few years ago, it was very clearly the death of journalism. That was the narrative, and selling assistive tools that help them tell their stories to more people more effectively was very hard sell. It is met with a lot of skepticism. Someone told me once that, why would you choose to enter this market? It's the most skeptical people with the least amount of money. And that continues to be true. But I think it's also very important for us to provide technologies to this group of people. But it's evolved. So the time horizon, skepticism will never use this, to internal usage and trial, to, oh, hey, it seems like everyone has their own trained model for their own tone of voice that they're quietly using on their own, to we need to get this institutionalized here and control it from an information and data security and privacy perspective, to editors and journalists now saying, this is 85 to 90% of the way there from an output perspective. How come it's not 95% of the way there? Or how come it isn't completely like me yet? So that's been a very accelerated process if you're looking at any technology of adoption, but I almost never get that question anymore of like, we would never use AI. I don't want to use AI. They're all using some AI in some capacity.
And I saw there's quite a few public reports already. You referenced one of them in an article you wrote, that 75% of Newsroom have either considered AI or researched AI tools, and they basically have an AI plan in place already.
That was a few months ago. So yeah, I think it's very much, it's a super outlier situation at this point. If we're talking to any organization that doesn't utilize AI in some capacity and has not established some sort of AI protocol.
Do you still find that there's a need to almost speak to the business people and not the journalists themselves every once in a while? Because maybe they understand, let's say, the financial implications of not using tools like this when everybody else does?
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's how we started. So it was more pressure from the C-suite that saw the value in saving a lot of time and optimizing a lot of content creation. But we also had to get the buy-in from editors, which are probably the second artist group behind journalists, to convince that this is beneficial. And we did that by just providing the first set of tools for, SEO optimized stuff that if we called machine learning functionally, they would never have wanted to have any conversation about, and just would have been excited to not have to do it. But once you add, the AI moniker to anything, it was a big deal.
Yeah, I actually remember my first conversation with, let's say, the editor of a tech publication that we all know. And she found out what Otherweb does, that it kind of does the job of an editor, just really quickly and imprecisely, you could say, more in a heuristic way. And man, that entire conversation was basically something between a lecture and her just staring me down. Like, how dare I try to pretend that we can do the work of an editor without years of training? But we're not pretending. We're just automating things a little bit, pre-screening it. But yeah, it's a tough conversation sometimes.
It definitely is. And I mean, that's also been seen through history. I think we're getting into nuanced conversations that are blending the business realities with the editorial creation aspects, with the AI data marketplaces that are emerging right now. We're certainly having a lot of conversations in that space. That's an area of potential excitement and hope for a lot of these organizational structures. And as you know, some of the very large ones have gotten very, very large deals already. I don't know if that's a sustainable structure, especially from a foundational model perspective, but it certainly is, I think, an emergent and very vibrant marketplace for applications that are being created on these technologies.
Do you see that actually sustaining these organizations for a while, or is it going to be a random sort of local anomaly?
I would love to say that they're going to all come together and have coalitions that really, really help set the marketplace so the technology companies don't set the marketplace. But it hasn't. The music industry has been a good example of being able to do that successfully, and that has been very good for them. But the rest of the media industries, I think, are very poor at constructing their perspective together and going to market and saying, this is how much you should value our content for. And I think we're at a place now where there is all that downward pressure. You're a local market TV station that's independent, or you're a very large scale newspaper chain. who's seeing a lot of layoffs and a lot of depression in terms of how they can monetize their current stack, and they might cave and say like, oh, it's not the best deal, but we'll take it. And that's my major worry, that they don't get to set the market for themselves again.
It's interesting that you mentioned the music industry as a positive example in this one, because I saw some research from Jaron Lanier, the father of VR, but he's also a musician, right? And he did some research at some point about the number of musicians that can essentially make a living writing music. And it's been going downhill for the past 40 years continuously. Right? So our digitization of music may have allowed musicians as a class to still continue to make money because they had this power to organize. But it's gotten way steeper and all the money goes to a few individuals. And most people don't make money in that profession.
That's funny. I guess you could argue the inverse also for journalists, right? So with the rise of the ghosts and the Substacks and all of that, individualized journalism is actually, niche media companies are doing a lot better than the larger scale ones. So while I guess statistically, definitely the amount of journalists that exist in America has gone down precipitously, like over the last couple of decades. The ability to make money in your niche is definitely, technology is providing that today.
There's also a lot more people that do the job of a journalist as they see it, essentially call themselves a blogger or a citizen investigator or something like that. So perhaps they don't go through the motions of becoming a credentialed journalist, but they're trying to do something similar, at least within their capabilities.
Yeah, if it's reductionist to the idea that a journalist is telling a story about an area that they may or may not have their expertise in, then you could open up the aperture to most content creators that have a passion for some sort of topic. Like, what's the differentiation, Yeah,
well, I would narrow it down a little bit. Like, I follow several channels on Twitter, for example, that analyze statistics about the Ukraine war. So they would try to analyze how many casualties, how much equipment was destroyed on each side, etc. They don't just provide a narrative. They try to dig into the data. They try to comb through multiple sources. They try to provide some information that is just purely factual and people can use to get a real understanding of what's going on. Because reading the news is actually not that informative in a conflict that's been going on for 2 years. Because if nothing has changed since yesterday, nobody's going to write about it. Right. So every day, 2,000 people die or get maimed. Nobody writes about it because yesterday it was the same number. Right. So the news is kind of misleading. But if you look at the stats every day, that actually gives you a better understanding of what's going on. So I'm sure these people aren't credentialed journalists, but they're trying their best to do the work of a journalist, I would argue. Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right to think of it in that way. I think that, I'd love to get your thoughts, but the view from nowhere idea of objective journalism that I've always felt was very hard to live up to, if you can even, seems to be doing a disservice to the modern way in which people consume news.
Not even just the modern way. I recently listened to the book The Chief about William Randolph Hearst, right? And you read about what happened 100 years ago and you're thinking, man, nothing has changed. Yellow journalism then, yellow journalism now, it's exactly the same thing. And he was basically open about there is no such thing as objectivity, right? It's all a competition of narratives in some sense.
Yeah. I think that seems obvious if you're outside of the industry. But inside of the industry, it's, in a lot of newsrooms, that's still very much held as the gold standard of what they should be trying to achieve. Yeah, it's a misalignment with everything, with incentives for them to be sustainable. It's a misalignment for, I think to your point, telling the whole kind of story that exists out there. Essentially, it's just, in an impossible goal anyway. Yeah, when you go against it and you have a point of view and a perspective and everything that you bring to a story, you see a lot of success. We've seen the rise of quite a few companies because of that.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, our approach has been, we don't think that purely objective writing exists, but we're just trying to aggregate as many different viewpoints as possible. And we're trying to select things that are written in a more informative way, right? So looking for almost stylistic cues or form-based cues of what constitutes something that is meant to inform rather than persuade. So obviously, it's still going to have a narrative, because even things that are written in an informative way, the facts may have been cherry-picked to produce a certain narrative, right? But as long as we sample multiple sources that all have their own narratives, and we select the things that are mostly informative, at least the reader has a chance. But
yeah, providing different perspectives and then aggregate. I mean, I was a huge fan of The Week. I don't know if The Week is still around. Are you familiar with that? It was like a weekly publication where they would take perspectives from 3 sides, basically left, center, and right, and try to amalgamate them into the story of whatever was happening. It's pretty cool.
So I don't know if they exist, but I would kind of give a shout out to 2 sources that do something similar. There's allsides.com, which is another aggregator that likes to have an article from each side all posted together. And as far as specific independent publications, there's a newsletter called Tangle. Their founder was on this show as well, because I like to promote my competition. It's a weird quirk. So they also do the same thing, but they don't just aggregate 3 articles from the different sides. They actually write their own independent newsletter, trying to weave in the narratives of all 3 sides in a balanced way, so the reader would understand what the centrists think, what the right-wingers think, and what the left-wingers think. So to anybody listening, highly recommend both of those. I personally read them as well, not just our stuff.
I'm going to check them out too. Keep you well-rounded.
Yep. All right. My last question. I like to try to push people towards the more optimistic side of things if I can. So given your view of the industry, given your view of the tech that is now serving the industry, what is the best case scenario? How can this develop in the best possible way?
Yeah, the best case scenario for this is that we emerge out of the other side of the next 5 to 10 years, truly having more time to spend understanding larger questions about the world around us and digging into ways in which we can improve society, right? So broadly, I'd say that that's the opportunity that AI represents at the most utopian kind of viewpoint. How that trickles down into the media industry itself, it means that there's a lot more free time that people have. So those eyeballs get a little wider in terms of what consumption could look like, and the ability for people to value stories that come from the world around them in a rich and layered and different perspective is something that is cherished a lot more than it has been in the past.
And hopefully it's all news and not cat videos.
Hey, you need some cat videos every now and then, but yeah.
We have a real cat over here, so
have the cat tell you the news and cat speak. You can probably have that happen.
I think you first need to go to Colorado or Oregon, where mushrooms are legal, and then your cat will tell you the news. All right, Josh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you.